Okay, let's make some cards with your gorgeous watercolor backgrounds. So here is my flower. So I'm going to show you how I take it off the board first of all. Now you want to peel very slowly. And even if you do peel slowly, and even if you put on, you really detacked your tape, it may take up some of your paper. And so that's why I'm just very careful pulling it off. And it's also why I usually always start with a larger piece and then cut it down to size. So again, go very slowly. If you can easily rip it, because it is such soft paper, it will rip just like that, and it pulls up a little bit, which is not the end of the world, but just know that it could happen. So you discard that, and then we're going to pull our piece in. Now for our watercolor piece, we do want to cut this down in size, and we want to cut it so that it is 3 3/4 by 3 3/4. So I've pulled in my cutting tool, my paper trimmer, and I'm going to put this first of all at 3 3/4, and I'm going to see if mine is pretty much in the center, and it doesn't need to be in the center for this card. So I can either take some off this side or I can take it off this side, because my piece right now is 4 inches. So I'm just going to take a little bit off of the left side. So I'm going to turn it around, put it at 3 3/4 here on the left hand side, and then I'm going to cut off that strip there. Now what I also want it to be is 3 3/4 this way. And I do want to take, it's going to be square by the time it's done. I want to take a little bit off my top, and I am going to take the rest off my bottom. So here's where you just sort of eyeball it. So I think maybe I'll just take this part off my top. And again, this is just personal preference. So you look at where your flower is on yours, then put it at 3 3/4 on the left-hand side and take the remaining off. So now I have a square. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to also stamp my stem in here. Now, if we didn't have our flower far enough this way, which I don't, I'm only going to get a portion of my stem. I'm not going to get every last bit of it. So when I'm stamping, what I do is I pull in my little grid pad, and I'm going to stamp in my Pear Pizzazz. And this part I don't want to be watercolored. I want it to look fairly solid on top. Now know that when you're stamping on top of watercolor paper just by hand, you do need to press a little bit harder. And I'm not gonna pull in my Stamparatus, but you could if you wanted, because this is a fairly simple one. And if it ends up looking a little bit watery, it's okay. Or a little hit and miss, it's fine. So just press that down. Give it a good press and lift up, and you have your stem on your flowers. And now what I want to do is I want to pull in my little piece of white. So I just have a little scrap of white, and I think that my size here was 1/2 an inch. No, it isn't. It's more than, it's 1 inch by 2.5. So I'm going to try and stamp my words. I'm doing Thinking of You in my Rococo Rose. I'm going to try and stamp it down on the bottom part so I can just cut off the top. So it's going to, I always line it up here, and then I'm going to try and stamp it here without getting my head in the camera. Okay, fairly straight. And now I'm just going to take my paper snips. And I know that this is scary for some people. If you don't like to cut like this, then pull in your paper trimmer, and I'll show you what you can do for that. If you pull in your paper trimmer, you can line this up on one edge, and I'm going to line it up at the 1/2 inch mark, I think, and then just cut it here. Okay, so you can cut like this, and for sure you're going to get it straight. And maybe I will do that too this time, just so that we are all on the same page. Now you have to be very careful lifting that off. If you put a piece of washi tape, it will hold it in place too for you. So I'm just carefully putting it down so it doesn't move. And then I'm going to cut. And I can also cut a little bit here. So maybe I'll cut a little. I just really want the words and nothing more than the words. Okay, so try and get that as straight as possible. But again, this is a handmade card. So if it isn't completely straight, that's perfectly fine. So now what else you needed was just a little piece of scalloped ribbon. And we also need to stamp the inside. So you need a piece here. This is 4 by 4, is it? No, 4 3/4 by 4 3/4. And I'm just going to do a repeat of the flower without any watercolor. So this is just my basic white. So I'm just down in the corner going to stamp my Blushing Bride, and then I'm going to go in with my Rococo Rose right on top. And it just is something a little bit to have a little bit of color on the inside of your card, which is really very, very pretty. Now we're going to put the card together, okay? So this is where we get a little bit more artisty, I guess is what we're going to say. So I have my piece of Designer Series paper, which is cut to 4x4. This is Rococo Rose. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to crinkle it up. Treat it sort of mean. So we're going to crinkle it up. We're going to make our edges a little bit bent. If you get a little rip in there, don't worry about it because that's the look we're going for. Now, if it really, really pains you to do this to your paper, don't. You can still just put it down straight. But I like the look of watercolor paper and almost an aged kind of. We could go in and sponge the edges if we want. We're not going to do that. We're just going to create a little bit of a roughed up surface. And then we're going to do the same thing with our watercolor. This will be a little bit harder because it is a much thicker paper. So if that's hard for you to do, if you have an old, we carried these years ago, but they're also used by nail artists, so estheticians. So you can get the edges sort of roughed up a little bit. It will give a little bit of a torn edge look. I usually take my nail and I will rough it up too, fold it up. Yeah, I know some of you are really cringing right now because this is not what you do to paper, right? You like it to look nice and straight, and that's okay. It's whatever, this is your card, so you do whatever you like to it. And I just remembered that there's one more little technique that I didn't do on top of this one. And so I'm going to grab that and show you how to do it here in just a moment. Okay, so you just want to give a little bit of interest, a little bit of texture, so it doesn't look quite so perfect. Now, the one thing I did forget to show you with my paintbrushes, I'm going to pull in my paintbrushes again with my large one, and I need a block. So I have a block, and I have some Pear Pizzazz. So I'm just going to do a little tiny bit of Pear Pizzazz, and I'm going to add a fair bit of water to that. So I'm going to make it pretty watery. Again, I just want a little bit of color. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take something, I could take a block or whatever, and I'm going to move everything else out of the way right now. And I am just going to tap this so that I get some splotches onto my card. Now this needs to be fairly wet for this to work, okay, for it to actually splatter. So, well, it's not wet enough. There you go. See how you're getting a little bit of the splotching happening? So it just, again, creates a little bit more of an antique-ish kind of look to it, just some interest. So you do want to let that dry. I forgot to do that first. So I'm just going to let that dry for a moment. And while we're letting that dry, we can put the other parts of our card together. So take your piece of Rococo Rose that is 5 by 10, scored at 5 in the middle, and we're going to glue down that piece of our basic white that is 4 3/4. I did get one green spot there. That's sort of why you want to do your splattering at the same time as you do your watercoloring. But when you do it, you don't want your paper to be super wet. So you want to have given your watercolor just a little bit of time to dry because, oh, and look, there were spots all down here and now I have it on the inside of my card, which I'm okay with because it just coordinates the inside of the card with the outside of the card. So it adds a little bit of interest there. I'm not going to put any greeting on the outside, on the inside rather, but you can do that. You can go ahead and glue down your paper. Now I have my paper so that it's going to be the writing outside. And when you have it sort of roughed up like this, it's almost hard to get it exactly centered. So you're purposely going to put it off center. Okay, you're going to off center that piece of your designer paper. And so I'm just going to go in with a little bit of, don't go right to the edge with your color, with your ink, with your adhesive, because then you won't be able to get these edges to stick up. So I'm going on an angle there. And now this is dry enough, almost dry enough. I'm going to wait, but that's going to glue right down here. So what I can do is I can use my liquid glue because then I don't have to press this on top of the wet paint to smear it. So I'm just going to put some of my liquid glue here and place that down, and I do want this one to be as straight as possible. So that's where you're going to get your straightness from, but that's going to go right down on top of our designer paper. So there is some dimension to this card. Again, if that really is difficult for you to do, you can glue it all down if you wish. We're going to take a little piece of our scalloped ribbon and we're going to put that on the side here. So I'm going to glue this down with some of our adhesive. Let's put that down on top. Doesn't want to go. There we are. And you don't have to worry about putting it all down because we will also be putting dimensionals on top of here. So then just take your dimensionals on the back of your I'm Thinking of You and put that right on top of your ribbon so you can see the scallops peeking out the bottom. Try and get it straight. There we go. And then our finishing touch is just going to be a few little pearls, and I'm going with just plain pearls here instead of colored ones because I like them just on the white. I'm going to take a larger one and just sort of peek it out from behind there. And I'm going to take a small one, which is fallen there, a small one here, and put it up here, and then another small one, and I'm going to just place it up here. So there you go. You have that card done. So all you've got is a little bit of that wash. So you just have a little bit of a background and you can go all around the card. You could do this for the entire image if you wanted to stamp your leaves first and have green coming off. I just like the pink. I just think it leaves it just a little bit more gentle of a card. So I have one other design very, very similar to show you. So here's another one where I did the exact same process where I have a little bit of the color pulling out that I'm hoping that you can see. So it's basically the exact same card, but it's done in a different card orientation, a different size, and some different colors. Not quite as soft to this one. This one's a little bit more bold, more vibrant, and this one's a little bit softer. So a little different look to creating just a soft watercolor effect.